Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's interactive webinar, Ask Our Experts, where we give all our attendees the chance to ask their questions about integrating a contact center with Microsoft Teams. This is actually the second one of our Microsoft Teams Tech Clinics. Some of you would have attended the first session 2 weeks ago, and maybe some of the information that was shared then opened up a few questions that you would like to ask us today. So let's welcome our experts, Peter Fedarb and Dave McDowell, solutions consultants here at Enghouse Interactive. Dave and Pete have been with Enghouse for 24 and 18 years respectively, so they have a huge amount of contact center experience, and I'm very, very pleased to have them both here today to share their deep knowledge on Microsoft Contact Center integration. Good morning, both.
Morning.
Thank you. Morning.
Right, before we start, I need to make a few housekeeping announcements. The webinar will be recorded and made available to you afterwards. And of course, you can ask questions. In fact, today we very much encourage you to ask your questions, and I quickly show you how to do that. All you need to do is click on the orange button with the white arrow to expand the control panel. Then you scroll down to the questions section, type in your question and hit send. Dave and Pete will answer your questions as we go along, but we had a few questions submitted to us prior to the webinar, and I think we will make a start with those questions. So I shall hand over to Dave.
Right, thanks a lot, Astrid. Right, so just going to start off with, as Astrid said, some questions that have been sent through, and we've got a few slides to help answer them. But before that, just to reiterate what the whole context of this is, it's, you know, Enghouse has a wide portfolio of products that sit in the whole customer interaction space. And today we're talking about them in the context of Microsoft Teams, and so more specifically around contact center, but obviously the peripheral pieces around that, things like call recording, omnichannel interaction, analytics, etc. So it's about our whole suite of products and how they interact and work alongside the Microsoft Teams environment. If I can get my screen to progress. So we've been working with Microsoft for a long time, 15 years as a co-development partner, right back in the days of OCS, where we had a native integration to Microsoft in 2008. So we've gone through that whole progression of Microsoft, of OCS, Link, Skype, and then Teams, starting off with SIP Teams and moving into native integration into Teams. And as part of that, we're in the TAP, the Technology Adoption Program, and a certified Microsoft Teams certified program for Connected Contact Center. So why are we interested in what's happening with Microsoft and Enghouse? It's about working together. Microsoft provides a complete UC suite with telephony, collaboration, etc., CRM. But what they don't provide is some of the point solutions around specific customer engagement. And that's where we come in with the contact center, with all our add-on capabilities across our whole product suite. And when we have those products, we like to integrate them tightly to the platform we're working with, in this instance with Microsoft Teams. So a lot of the questions, you know, that we're going to come up, we'll talk about today will be about how we work with Teams, what are the challenges, what to look out for, etc. So moving straight on, as I said already, we've got two sections here really. The first is the pre-submitted questions, which we've prepared some material to answer, and then we'll open it up to the interactive questions where you don't need to wait till that bit. If you think of anything before then, please just put it in the question section while we're going through, and then we'll have an interactive session where we answer those questions. So for the first topic, I'm just going to hand you over to Pete to go through this one.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for joining everybody. So working in pre-sales, we work with a lot of customers looking to move with teams, and traditionally, sort of one of the most asked questions, even from the webinars that we've been doing and the polling ones out, a lot of people are interested in what do I do in the event of a failure, and that can be the event of the failure within the contact center, and it can also be within the failure within Teams. Because Teams is a multi-tenant platform that's there, it's quite public when things go wrong. And I do actually ask customers when I get asked that question, well, what would you do if your traditional PBX fails on site today? And it's surprising how many don't have an answer for that question. We're going to run you through some of the suggestions that we have around different architectures that can be used. And we'll take you through those options, and you may use one or more of those within your solution, because resiliency is about how much do you want to spend and how much protection that you think you need. And realistically, the infrastructure can look different for very different customers. We could move on to the next slide for me, Dave. So firstly, around sort of protection of the contact center, we can understand how we would put some resiliency into the contact center solution. So what we have sitting in the middle is your SBCs that you're using for direct routings that are going to shift the calls to the left up into the Teams cloud. And obviously on the right-hand side, we have some contact center servers there. So what we've done in this diagram is to give you dual SBCs so that you've not got a single point of failure for the SBCs. Now they could be active-passive, where one is the primary, the other one's just a backup. But they could also be active-active. So the way that these lines are colored could change depending on how you have those SBCs set up. But realistically, when the calls are coming into those SBCs, we're going to really pass those calls across to an Enghouse server. We would conference them up. Then we would put a call back to the SBC to route it up to Teams to talk to the actual agents there. So if either SBC failed or either EICC server failed, the other would take over, whether it's the primary SBC working with the secondary system or whether it's the secondary SBC working with the primary system. It could work in any way with those green and yellow lines in the middle there. It could work in any format depending on more or less how your SBCs are pretty much configured for your outside lines. But over to the left, we can see both SBCs are capable of routing the Teams with the blue lines there up to the Teams cloud that's there. But if Teams, oh, sorry, Dave, I think you've moved back a slide there. If for any reason that the contact center service failed, so if we lost the whole two servers on the right-hand side, we would then use the red lines from the SBC to route calls up to a Teams call group. So you're getting the voice call delivery, you're just not getting the more intelligent delivery that the contact center could provide, and some of the statistical information about number of calls, wait times, and those sorts of things. But you're falling back to almost hump groups in traditional telephony terms. So although we can build in those two different layers at the SBC level with a contact center server, you have a tertiary fallback into Teams hump groups should you need to. And for those customers that have a Teams, a Skype solution today, and if you're using sort of the communication center product, then you'll see that's very similar to having a primary and a secondary system there, and falling back to what they would have known as response groups within there. So it's keeping that sort of tradition of that Microsoft layers, 3 layers of resiliency that we try to put into the solution. We can move on to the next slide, Dave. Quite often everyone says, well, how do I try and keep my teams going in the event of a Teams failure? So Microsoft does have an additional cost that you can apply to your tenancy, where you can have multi-regional support or multi-region support. And that's basically that you'll be able to register 2 separate regional clouds. So you could do one in the UK, for example, you could do one in Northern Europe, you could do 2 in UK, depending on if you have any concerns about your data that's there. But realistically, what you're really saying is that I've got almost that dual PBX that's being deployed there. Is a bit more of a premium on your licensing and the setup and configuration around that, but that is possible to do within Teams. However, there is a downside to that, and there's 3 little boxes here on the right-hand side that sort of explain that Teams has an underlying phone system element to it that controls the phones. Then you have your Teams layer on top where you have your collaboration elements, but really they sit all on top of things like Azure AD that are there. So in that scenario, the failure may not be with Teams, and some of the more of their public outages haven't actually been the Teams that's failed. It's actually been the login to Teams that was controlled by Azure AD. It also took out things like Office 365 that's there. So within that system there, Teams does have some dependencies on other things that are happening with the Microsoft stack. So there are some other resiliencies that you can build into this as well. And if we move forward to the next slide there for us, Dave, there are devices that have merged out onto the market. People from the Skype for Business world would be familiar with the term of SBA. It's a survivable branch appliance. And realistically, that is an SBC in its own right. But what it's able and capable to do is, if we look in the bottom left-hand corner, our clients have a red line going back to that SBC, that in the event that the Teams cloud fails, you can now register your Teams clients to an SBA, and that will give you basic voice functionality. Now, by basic voice functionality, what we really mean is that it will be able to deliver phone calls for you. They won't be able to do things like hunt groups. It's just going to do things like Teams DDIs. It's going to keep the minimum working for you. You would lose things like collaboration, like chat, for example, within that scenario. The ability for some of those SharePoint elements, but it's all about keeping that basic, voice intact. So you might find that putting an SBA in is going to keep that basic layer of voice in there. And for everybody that understands how the contact center work, well, when the call comes in, the SBC places it into the SIP trunk to the contact center. That is conferenced up on our side. When we find the agent that we want to send that through to, we invite them by DDI number. So when we place that call to the SBC, if the Teams is unavailable, it could send it that SBA route. And if the Teams client is registered there, then the phone calls from the contact center will still work. So even in that environment, we will be able to work by delivering calls. There is a slight limitation there, that we won't be able to detect the Teams presence of users, because that really comes from the cloud, which may be fully down. Therefore, we may not be able to get that. So we're going to be sort of a bit of blind delivery in that purpose that's there. But if we were to get, try and send to a call and the agent wasn't logged in or wasn't available, then we'd get a busy back from the SBC. We would requeue the call and send it to the next agent along. So it won't be 100% effective delivery, but it should be somewhere in the region of sort of 80 to 90%. And you may get the odd time where it's going to take that extra couple of seconds to get a call through, because we might hit a couple of sort of not logged in agents or unavailable agents before we find somebody that's there. But again, it's about covering and keeping things flowing through the system in the event of a major cloud failure that's happening there. Now, a lot of people are realistically going to be moving their SBCs up to, if you like, the carrier, doing what Microsoft will refer to as Operator Connect. And that really is where you're using the SBCs within your carrier's data center to send your calls up to Teams. So this SBC wouldn't be on your premise. It's really living in sort of your carriers, whether it's BT, Vodafone, whoever your lines with. Those carriers will be doing the routing for you from their location and their data centers. Those SBCs are normally big multi-tenant SBCs, and the carriers don't tend to like putting in an SBA at that level, because they'd have to configure them for all of their individual customers. So you'll probably find that they'll have a multi-tenant SBC there, but what would be an option for you within that environment is to have a sub SBC, or the SBA, if you like, in place there, that they will put in line on a customer by customer basis that's there. Mainly because those big, great SBCs that they're using to route, hundreds of customers' calls through, won't realistically have that SBA functionality, and there'll be more specific devices at a single organization level. So you can talk to carriers around sort of having that SBC in place. They do provide, most of the typical SBC providers provide an SBA now. A lot of them have been through the Microsoft certification now. So it gives you that other option of being able to at least keep your basic voice going through Teams as well. So again, you could make your contact center resilient. You can make a little bit of that Teams voice resilient in there, but there are a few other options for people that want to keep it a little bit more simple. or need something even better than that. So if we move on to the next slide, Dave. So on the left-hand side, there are a lot of carriers out that way that will do hunt groups in the cloud, what they would normally term as carrier groups. So even before the calls get into you, you could basically switch on a carrier plan, a carrier group plan, which enables you to route calls through to a number of mobile devices that will give a ring group to mobile phones or perhaps to home phones at that point in time, or an alternate destination that's there. And this is really where most people probably have their resilient with their traditional PBX. So if all fails on site and there's a major sort of outage on site, most people will resort to that carrier level. It could be rerouting your 0800 number. It could also be that you have a ring round group with your carrier that's there. So if you want something that's overarching, the best place to do it is at the point of entry. When it comes in the PSTN, you could switch it to an alternative at that point in time. It's the simplest and the cheapest. So if you're only a small system and you don't want to spend too much on that sort of resiliency, you want to keep calls coming in, that's actually one of the more common options that people go for. The customers where we have sort of people that say, I'm a blue light service, or it's a key service that we need to keep running within there. Over on the right hand side, well, there are other alternatives that are not dependent on a Teams and can run as a standalone contact center with a web client into it. And you could always have a DR version of a contact center. So a completely different platform. It would be slightly different interface for an agent. But if you needed something that was belt and braces to keep going at that point in time, there's no reason why you can't have a resilient cloud option that you can move to if you so choose to. That could be diverted automatically or be controlled manually by the PSTN cloud. So you could get your provider just to swing those sort of lines across to your platform and get your agents to sign into it to the alternative platform should you wish to. But again, through those options, it's about how much do you want to spend? Do you want to keep it simple? How much architecture you're trying to protect within there? And sometimes the one on the left, the carrier groups, as I say, is quite a popular option in there for more of the small, low-cost options. But there's lots of protections you can have around Teams and the contact center. That means that you can have this as a very last resort one as well. So again, it's entirely up to customers really where they sit, but those are the common options that we're looking for with customers. So I think that's where I hand back to you, Dave.
Yep, thanks, Pete. Right, the next section is just a reiteration around what are the integration options for a contact center into Teams and how do they differ. So we covered this in the previous session to an extent, but this is just a summary again to remind everybody of what the different integration options actually are. So the first integration option for communication center we brought to market with Teams was the SIP integration. So this was been in use since 2017, and it is by far the most common method used currently, not just by ourselves, but across most of the vendors. It comes off direct routing, and basically it's the scenario Pete has just been showing in those the sort of failover scenarios of where a call is routed to an SBC, the SBC routes to the EICC or contact center server. That's held in conference, the call, and then an outbound call leg goes to Teams via the SBC using direct routing. Very reliable, well proven. I mean, the thing it doesn't support is it doesn't support the Microsoft call plans. So the call must be coming through an SBC that can have a SIP trunk to the contact center server. What we've latterly introduced is what is sometimes called the native integration, and that's using the Microsoft Graph APIs, and more specifically the calling APIs within there. So in this scenario, we're not so interested in how the call gets to Teams. It supports direct routing, Microsoft call plans, etc. And the calls route directly to the phone system, so to the Microsoft cloud, where they're going to be placed into a conference in the Microsoft cloud. And this is actually a bot, an Azure bot that will handle the call in there. So the call routes to Azure, goes into the bot, and then we use the calling APIs to control that bot, to stream audio in, for example, the positioning queue, estimated time to answer, comfort messages, deal with IVR options, etc. And then when ready, we deliver the call by inviting the agent's Teams client into that bot. And the bot is effectively a conference in the Microsoft phone system. So this is still a developing integration. There are some gaps, feature gaps between SIP and the native calling APIs, particularly around call control in transfer scenarios and presentation of the CLI when we transfer calls. So it is available, but it is something that needs to be appraised properly on each individual case-by-case basis about whether some of those feature gaps meet the specific customer requirements or not. But as I say, it opens up the whole scenario for we don't now care how the call got into the Microsoft phone system in the first place. What's coming next is an iteration on top of that Microsoft calling API, where we're adding the ACS API. And the ACS API is Azure Communication Services. This is a set of APIs that allow you effectively to embed a soft phone, a phone system soft phone within your own application. So in that instance, what that will be is our web touchpoint client in Communication Center will have an ACS soft phone embedded in it. Now, you have to think of Teams and phone system as two layers, really. Phone system is the call routing and the call handling part of the Microsoft stack. And the Teams client, from an agent perspective, is just the voice endpoint. That's where the call is delivered to. So instead of answering a call on that voice endpoint, we're using the ACS APIs. We can answer the same call within the touchpoint client itself. What that gives us is the direct control of the endpoint, and it allows us to overcome some of the challenges with the calling API in those transfer scenarios. So this is due, the first release of this is due for the end of August this year. And we will then obviously carry on developing that integration. One of the things this will allow us to do, which we can't currently do, is to bring a native console into our product in Microsoft Teams. So they're the three. On the left, been in market for some time. In the middle is available, but still needs some care about which use cases it works for or not. And then hopefully we'll be overcoming a large number of those challenges with the ACS implementation later this year. Another question is often asked is, what other contact center business functions can we still use in Microsoft Teams? And because one of the things about our contact centers is they're omni-channel contact centers. They're not just about voice calls. They do all of the other stuff as well. All of our other peripheral solutions, things like call recording, things like CRM integration, etc., and the omni-channel capabilities. So what's different? Well, very little is different in the Teams world from any other environment. On the first one is our quality management suite, QMS. Call recording is available directly in Teams, just as it was on other platforms. In fact, in the Teams world, we have 3 different audio capture methods that are available. We can take it in the SIP scenario. We can take calls directly from the Communication Center server. So they're coming from the conferences, which is ideal if you only want to record contact center calls. We can also do SIP-REC from the SBC, which not only allows us to do the contact center calls, but also direct calls in or out from any of the Teams users that are going through that SBC solution. And finally, which is becoming the predominant method of doing recording in the Teams world, is we're using the Graph API again for the compliance recording within Teams itself. So this is native Teams recording. What actually happens is QMS, the quality management suite, the server, becomes a bot that is invited into calls. So you set your compliance recording policy within Teams to say this agent needs recording. And what happens then is QMS is invited into the call to actually record the audio stream into the QMS database. And then on the back of that, whichever recording method you use, we have our full quality management suite. So everything we've done prior is still there and available. And we're building all the time on these capabilities around the quality management side with analytics built in, etc. CRM integrations are another important factor, and these work in exactly the same way. You know, we have our out-of-the-box Salesforce, Dynamics, SAP, and ServiceNow integrations. We can do many more custom integrations. The integration methods remain the same because we're an overlay on the telephony environment. We are getting all of the same call information we've always been getting, and therefore can drive our CRM integrations as required. The other one is, of course, the omni-channel interactions themselves. So, as I said before, we're not just about voice on this platform. We're about the other channels that are coming in, and the whole point of us is to provide a unified environment for agents to handle these different interaction channels. So we still support the channels like SMS and outbound dialing, activity queuing, live chat for an agent, email queuing, social media integrations, etc., to call out just a few. As time goes on and we get the more native integrations, get more depth, we'll also be able to pull in other channels from within the Microsoft ecosystem as well. So at the moment, we can do IM that initiates from Teams as well as voice calls, etc. Another layer of integration that's becoming more and more common is virtual assistants and self-service. So again, this is about leveraging both the existing interfaces that we have, because we have many chat and automated solutions that sit well outside of the Microsoft stack and the Azure estate, but we can also start bringing these things into those cognitive services that become part of our native handling of interactions in the platform. That might just be from one level of basic FAQ type virtual assistants right through to AI based self-service, but with the full escalation into the contact center queues to live agents. So if we start a conversation with a virtual assistant and the virtual assistant is either unable to answer a question or is maybe programmed to say, no, this should go to a live agent, maybe it's a high value transaction that we want a human touch on, then it can escalate that into the contact center, pass the context, pass the chat history from that automated self-service session, and give it to the agents. Another side that isn't really the contact center per se, but is other part of our portfolio is the call logging and auditing. So we have a Proteus call logger, which works across a whole range of traditional PBX and UC environments, but also works in the Teams environment. Now, in the contact center, we're providing a whole level of detailed analytics and metrics for how many calls came in, how quickly they were answered, when they were transferred, etc. But it can be a challenge sometimes in the Teams environment to get that same level of analytics on the back office. And that's where the call logging platform can come in. It can be looking at the entire Teams estate, looking at those call volumes, the call durations, directions, etc. But also takes data from Teams around call quality, around how was it, what was the experience like on those calls? Are we getting a lot of jitter and drops in our calls, etc. So just another thing to consider that is still available and can fit nicely into an overall solution in the Teams environment. The next one is, I just did touch on this a little, very briefly, but is Teams instant messaging and video support. So when we were back in the Skype world, we were actually handling Skype calls. So we were able to, for internal Skype to Skype traffic, where we are using the contact center specifically around IT help desks, HR help desks, etc. When a call came into an agent, by default, you had the ability within a call to actually do things like video escalation. We also had the ability by default to queue IMs. So if you were in an organization and sent an IM to a Skype endpoint that was a contact center queue, then that could be queued and delivered as a chat to agents. Now, with the current SIP integration with Teams, we can't emulate those same functions. We can, however, do IM queuing currently. So standalone IM queuing, Teams IM we're talking about here, can come through our social connect layer, and we can deliver that as a queue into Teams. But it's not actually possible yet to do those escalations to video and have them tied into a voice session. Now, this is all going to be, we're expecting to deliver this type of functionality once we have the ACS integration. Because with the ACS integration, the endpoint, i.e. the ACS client that sits in Touchpoint, is actually a phone system and Teams endpoint. So it will be in time be able to handle those things natively, those video escalations and those instant messages within it. So that is something that we can do. The basic IM today in terms of queuing, but we expect a much richer integration coming forward. So I think that was it on the pre-submitted questions. It's more a matter of now of just opening up for any questions the audience may have. Please put your questions in the questions window as Astrid showed at the beginning. So I've not been looking, Pete, have we got anything through yet? Or?
Yeah, well, we've got one in there, Dave. It's basically, it sounds like it's an existing customer potentially asking, the recommendation is to move these applications. I'm assuming it'd be contact center and things like call recording up to Azure, and what are the benefits of that? And I can take the answer on this one, Dave. I think realistically, the contact center, whether you're doing sort of the SIP integration or whether you're doing the sort of native integration, that can really sit anywhere. But putting the contact center up into the cloud and into the Azure environment is going to reduce points of failure. And that's what we try to protect against and make it as resilient as possible. Because sitting the server into the Azure stack, basically that's where Teams live. We call it Microsoft Data Center, if you like. That's really what Azure is in its basic concept. That having direct access to those APIs across Microsoft backbone, you're not reliant on a connection from your on-premise or from your data center to go up to Teams at that point in time. And that's where the Azure hosting is taking that internet connectivity out where things could go wrong. You're removing that and trusting that the Microsoft backbone is going to be a whole lot more reliable. It actually gets more important for the call recording, as Dave was running through, that the native call recording is a possibility that's there. There are other options to sort of mirror it from the EICC server to get your voice there, or from an SBC. But if you want to do all-encompassing recording, you really want to be using that native recording API. That's what gives you things like internal Teams call recordings within there, and you're not really sort of restricted to just doing external only, which the other methods will limit you to. The thing and the key thing about that is that recording API, what Microsoft's doing is pushing recordings from those meetings, if you like, or the conference producer that we're using there, and pushing them out, if you like, to an application. Now, Microsoft don't want to take responsibility of pushing that recording data outside of their Microsoft environment, because they'd become responsible for a whole host of GDPR and personal data potential at that point in time. So especially if you're looking at your recording there, Azure is the best place to host at that point in time. So Just checking, see if there's anything else come in, but it looks like it's a little bit quiet today. We'll just give everybody a few seconds, I think, to try and put a question in.
Just one thing I'll add on that, Pete, while we're waiting, is on the Azure deployment as well. Even within Azure deployment, there are different models available from a customer consumption perspective. We can push that up into their Azure tenancy, so into a customer's Azure tenancy, or it could be hosted in a partner or Enghouse tenancy where we offer a managed service, or our partners offer a managed service around those platforms. So there are still choices within there, and even when it's in the customer Azure tenancy, using role-based access controls, it's possible for a customer to still have that as a managed instance by a partner or Enghouse, because all that protection layer is there. The supporting partner or supporting party would only have access to that particular service within Azure.
I mean, it's one of those, Dave, it really comes down to sort of, some people like financial industries, I think, will want to keep ownership of their data, whereas some people want to offload things like management and responsibility, and that's where that service wrapper comes in. And then they're different things, and that, everyone can make a offering that really suits every individual customer need there. But putting the actual structure of the applications within that environment is probably the best way to go to keep everything with the Microsoft stack, and add the wrapper as you like it around that, on where and who hosts it and what layers of service you get over the top of that.
Yeah. Okay, well, we haven't had any more questions. Oh, just one coming through right now. Chance to read it. Right, so the question is, regards to licensing in the SBCs, how many SIP licenses will we need per call? Any trunk licenses required? Now, the way that the licenses work on SBCs does vary between SBC, but typically in the SIP world, we are talking about 2 sessions per active call. So there's the call leg that's coming in to into the SBC and goes through to EICC, and in most instances, on most SBCs, that's a session. And then there's the call leg that comes back from EICC through the SBC up direct routing. And so that is, another SIP session. Now, not all SBCs do their licensing the same, but that's the sort of typical one. So when you think about calls, active calls with an agent, they would be using 2 SIP sessions at a time. But a call that's queuing is using 1 SIP session. When you're doing a call transfer from an agent to another agent, there will be a point, if you're doing a supervised transfer, where 3 sessions would be in use during one call. Anything to add on that, Pete, in terms of differences between different SBCs?
No, it's pretty much, it depends. Some of the older SBCs, you would have, for example, a call coming from from the PSTN would be 1 trunk, one going to the contact center would be another, one coming back would be another, and one going up to Teams would be another. So some of those would actually consume sort of 4 endpoint licenses in some of the older SBC. But now a lot of those manufacturers route it, as you say, Dave, that if a call traverses in and out, that still only consumes 1 channel at that point in time. So it is something just to double check with your SBC vendors there. The more modern ones work on the channel concept rather than the 4 physical legs that you have there, but it is something for consideration. As Dave said, that we would traditionally do sort of a call into the contact center and then a call to the agent. So you've got the customer leg coming in and the call to the agent going out. And it's always good to put that buffer in again for additional calls queuing or possible transfers, supervisors doing monitoring. So that good rule of thumb is that 2.5 times the number of agents is what we tend to work as a good amount. But we do take into view how busy is your contact center. Is everybody going to be on the phone at the same time? There are contact centers out there that may have 20, 30 agents, but only ever 2 or 3 are on the phone at the same time because they do a lot of other medias and activities that are there. So we do take that into a rule of thumb. But if you want something that is going to be, you know, spec'd according to being square as we like it, so it's non-blocking, 2.5 is a rule that we would use that would work for anybody. And we would slim that down depending on the conversations we have with individual customers to their requirements. So, you know, we can make the most out of not over licensing SBCs at that stage.
Right, we've not had any others. So at that point, I won't keep people on just for the sake of it, but thanks for that. I'm going to hand back to Astrid for a couple of things to wrap up. But from my and Pete's perspective, thanks for your time, everybody. If you've got any questions after the event, please do send them through anyway. I'll be happy to deal with them. Or if there's something a bit more specific to your environment, then great. So I'll just hand over to Astrid for a couple of things to close off.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, before you go, I just wanted to make you aware of this guide. It's called the Connected Contact Center Native Integration with Microsoft Teams, and it covers the topics that we discussed today in a lot of detail, so you might find it useful. And I can only reiterate what Dave just said. If you have any questions, if you wanted to get in touch, Dave, if you could move on to the next slide. Here you can see the contact details you can use to reach us. Thanks very much to Pete and Dave for all their support and for this really engaging presentation. Thanks to our audience as well. I hope you found it useful. And yeah, for now, enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thanks all. Thanks for your time.